Hello, everyone. So we just had the 2020 election yesterday. We're having results coming in now. Um, it's an incomplete picture, but we have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. Biden is pretty much projected to win. It's not really set in stone yet, and there is a path to victory for Trump. I guess with the courts, we'll get into that. Let me just tell you where the vote stands as of now. Um, and I'm seeing right here it's very close now with the electoral vote. I mean, Joe Biden's at 264, it says, and Donald Trump at 214. For the popular vote, Joe Biden is at 71,286,000 votes. Donald Trump is at 68,161,000 votes, and so that's like around the same dynamic as Hillary and Trump. It's about a 3 million vote difference. However, yeah, I mean, like, both candidates, or both, I guess, parties in this case, like, they got more votes than last time. So basically, Trump overperformed a lot more than people thought he was going to. Biden pretty much underperformed because, I mean, they were saying he's at a 8 point lead in the national average, and that just doesn't seem to be coming out in the numbers now. And I was very skeptical of a Biden landslide. It's like I was not ruling it out, because basically, like, my cognitive dissonance with that was like in 2016, the polls weren't actually that wrong, and people were saying that they were wrong. Um, when in reality, I mean, Hillary was only leading Trump by about 3 or 4 percentage points nationally, and so that's more or less how the race turned out. I mean, like, she had a popular vote lead by about 3 million votes, except in the right places, Trump eked it out in the Electoral College. And I mean, that was a pretty sizable victory for Trump back then, 306, I think it was. Excuse me, with the electoral vote. But I mean, the polls, to the extent that the polls were wrong in 2016, I would say that they're more wrong, that they were more wrong this time in 2020, because they just didn't account for the dynamic being set up here. It was making it look like Biden was going to pretty much landslide this thing, and that didn't really just happen. It looks like he's projected to win, but he's just eking it out. And I mean, it's worth saying, like, with how incompetent Trump is, and like the fact that we had a pandemic and a depression this year, like, and he's a chaos candidate. And what I say by that is, like, he's divisive. I mean, like, if you want to, I know a lot of the Republicans, they point to the Democrat-run cities, they blame Democrats for everything, right? Well, even if I want to grant you that, straw man argument, because, like, there's so much nuance to, crime rates and these kind of things in big cities, like, there's so much nuance that they're leaving out, and it's just like, oh yeah, Democrat-run cities, like, that must be it. Okay, if I want to grant that is true, your idea that, like, they're ruining everything just because Democrats run the cities. Trump is supposed to be the leader. He's supposed to be the president and bring people together. And I'm sorry, but if you if this is Trump's idea of bringing people together, like, it didn't work. It's like, in a lot of ways, I think the results of this election show that we are very divided. It shows, like, Trump has a lot of popularity. He's not winning the popular vote right now, of course, or the electoral vote as it stands right now. But people just did not really see how he was reaching a lot more people, especially in minority communities. I mean, the Latino vote was pretty crucial, I think, in this race, especially with Florida, because a lot of those Latino voters in Florida, they have strong feelings about socialism, and dictators, and they just were like, yeah, Biden's a socialist. It looks like the Democrats are the party of socialism. So, it is nuanced. I'm gonna at least admit that. I mean, so for those voters in Florida, that they were probably motivated by that in that way. Like Biden is a socialist, even though he's not. As I've pointed out, he's a neoliberal centrist through and through. But for other Latino voters, excuse me, say in Texas or Nevada, so Trump won Texas, and they were talking about how Texas was competitive for the Democrats, and the turnout was historically low for Democrats in Texas. Um, so, and to be honest, from what I have seen, videos here and there, like there is a contingent of Latino voters that basically agree with Trump on his immigration policies. They want stricter immigration. It's like even though Trump said all these terrible things about Mexicans, they're rapists, they're criminals. I assume some are good people, yada yada. Like that doesn't matter. Like the racism doesn't matter. He just has this policy set on immigration, and a lot of them agree with him on that. So I think it's a combination of that. Like they just kind of have that more right wing tendency on that issue, but also it could be the opposite thing. It could be that a lot of Latino voters were not comfortable getting behind Biden because Obama deported more people than Trump. Okay, and there's multiple videos of people confronting Biden about the deportations, about multiple issues. It's not even just immigration. Like people can confront him about climate change. But he's told so many people to their face, like just vote for Trump, like vote for the other guy. So you're not giving people hope in the sense that like you're not showing that you're for what their agenda is, like trying to establish a sense of basic human rights. No matter, it's like even if you're an illegal immigrant, you may have broken the law, but you have to be treated with a certain sense of decency, and we shouldn't be separating families, like, and locking kids in cages. And I know, yeah, Joe built the cages, right? Great excuse. Monkey see, monkey do. So these Republicans, like, they're just so opportunistic. They use any little thing to just wiggle out, and you know, the Democrats, their problem in this like narrow case with like the immigration thing, I think it was a problem on every issue with the Democrats. They just were not palatable enough. Like they didn't present enough of a vision that was concrete and tangible to people. Like it was just such an amorphous blob of a candidacy, Biden and Harris. I think that was a big issue, honestly. It's not even so much because I don't buy this idea that like, oh yeah, like Biden just didn't condemn socialism enough. That's why he's not doing so well in certain demographics, certain places. Like, no, that's not why. Because he was constantly talking about like, yeah, I beat Bernie Sanders, I beat all these left-wing ideas. But Biden was doing this. He was bragging about this, and he's freaking talking about Venezuela, like he's asked about like what's like people are afraid that you're going to be socialist, Joe. Like why is that not true? It's not true because like I don't like Venezuela, I don't like Maduro, and I like the guy Juan Guaido who Trump likes. So it's like, really, you're basically a right winger on foreign policy, Joe Biden. he acts like he's going to end the wars. I highly doubt that. Like we might withdraw troops, and the same thing with Trump, by the way. Like I don't buy that he's going to get a Middle East peace deal. If we're not going to end the wars, we're going to withdraw certain amounts of troops and act like it's such a huge deal. But we're still involved all over the world, and no, that's not good enough. And so let's go to what Trump said late last night or early this morning, rather. He gave a press conference, which was truly infuriating to me. just so many things that were just kind of like a bridge too far, where he basically just like claimed victory. And I know I see the people on Fox News now. They're all like, "Yeah, it's like, well, Biden's not claiming victory, but his team is saying that he won." All right, like, do you not understand? There like a little subtle difference between the candidate like officially saying like, "Yeah, I've declared myself the victor," and their team, their staffers putting forth that idea. And in Trump's case, he's already the president. So that kind of precedent of just establishing like this early victory that's based on nothing, based on unofficial counts. He mentioned states that were still. I'm gonna check. I mean, like these states are still not called. Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina. He said. And I think he was bragging about Wisconsin and Michigan. They're projected to go to Biden right now. Um, but he's talking about things that are premature, and he said specifically like we should stop counting the votes. So you know what? Like I get really pissed off when people are like, it's like, oh, we just want to make sure this is a fair process. We want to make sure that I'm not a sore loser, right? But like, I just want Trump to get a fair shake. Well, I think if that was the case, you wouldn't be advocating for stopping the vote count. All right, you want to talk about cheating and fraud and trying to just steal an election? Well, guess what? Like, you're not basing this idea of fraud on anything. The idea of a mass scale event like this, where Biden is in the lead by like 3 million votes, he's in the electoral vote lead too. So, where's the mechanics of this? You know, it's like if they can knock off some mail-in ballots here and there, the GOP has legal challenges all over the country in all these different states. So, you know, if they can win in one, area, and the courts decide basically like, yeah, we're just not going to count these mail-in ballots, that is, potentially a way that, now that's, by the way, like that's only if Trump definitely wins Pennsylvania and Georgia, which is not really a definite conclusion right now, because we have the mail-in ballots to still count. Georgia will probably come in before Pennsylvania, I think. Pennsylvania, as far as I know, like they have until Friday to receive the ballots. They've started the vote count, as far as I know, for mail-in ballots today in Pennsylvania, but they're saying the mail-in ballots will likely lean Democratic. So, point being, like Trump is leading right now in Pennsylvania and Georgia. But even if he does win Pennsylvania and Georgia, that's not enough for Trump to win. So he would have to knock off. He would have to get a court victory in another place. It could be Arizona, could be Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, potentially, and in Pennsylvania if it turns out the mail-in ballots flipped it for Biden and now Biden won Pennsylvania. So. And Trump in this press conference, he said like he reached out to the Supreme Court. He's like we're gonna go to the Supreme Court. Okay. Like, people are so done with this system. Okay, because trying to do these mental gymnastics to try and defend this guy Trump, who like it's looking like, if he is going to be able to become president, he hasn't won the popular vote now for the second time in a row. So we don't live in a democracy. Stop saying we live in a democracy, first of all, because that's a joke. If you're going to defend this idea that this person who is not getting the most votes is deserving of president, and you want to just like change the results because it's not going your way. I mean, like that's all it's based on, honestly, because Where's the evidence for all of this fraud stuff? It's just like it comes out of nowhere. And look, I'll be the first to admit, if some state, it turns out, was called a wrong way, if Arizona was called incorrectly, if there was, any kind of foul play with the fraud go, going on, supposedly, right? Like, I want there to be procedures and standards for things. But the problem that people are not getting is that the Republicans, like, it's not just based on like a system of like we're just trying to achieve justice and a fair vote count. They want to go after every mail-in ballot possible and just knock that number down. They're looking for any opportunity to discredit them. It's something as simple as you didn't sign your name correctly or something, you didn't fill this out correctly. And people might have a different opinion about it, but you know what? I think we have to make voting easier in this country, not harder. I believe in direct democracy. I believe one person, one vote. And again, you can look at actual cases of wrongdoing, and that's fine to discredit those ballots. I'm not saying that there's no scenario where we can't reject ballots. Like, obviously we should be able to reject a ballot if that it warrants it. But I'm not gonna sit here and say we should be doing that just because it's not going well for Trump and like, oh, it's not filled out quite correctly. If everything else is on the up and up, if you're registered to vote and you're a U.S. citizen, like, a simple mistake shouldn't disenfranchise your vote. And this is a very simple common sense thing, and I don't see why it's that hard to grasp why the Republicans are just trying to manufacture a particular result. This is what it is. They want to achieve a particular result. And at this point, the only way Trump can win, I think, is in the courts. Because, like I've been saying, Pennsylvania and Georgia can't do it alone for Trump. So some kind of trend has to reverse course on these different states, whether it be Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan. Like, something would have to reverse course and Trump ends up winning that state. So it's just, there's too many miracles that have to happen for Trump at this point. So I think there is a path to victory for Trump in the sense that there's all these different legal challenges. So my opinion is that if it ends up the GOP challenge wins at the state level, if it has to go to the Supreme Court, I think that they will hand Trump a victory. Because it just doesn't matter what John Roberts does at this point. It'll be a 5-4 conservative decision giving Trump a victory by basically just discrediting mail-in ballots in whatever state that it applies to. So this is totally authoritarian stuff. And people just want to like cling to the tradition and just be like, oh yeah, like this is obviously the way we've done things for 200 years. There's nothing more we can do. I believe in democracy. And in this country, we tell ourselves we're a democracy. It's a lie. I wish it were true. But that just dichotomy, or, just, I don't know what else to say. But just like, it pisses me off that there's a discrepancy in the fact that, like, we call ourselves a democracy and we're actually not. Let's go to this Hill article real quick. I thought it was pretty interesting. Some stuff I've probably basically said already. But it was 5 takeaways from election night 2020. I just thought it outlined things pretty interestingly. Excuse me. Win or lose, Trump overperformed. Trump has, at the very least, performed much better than most polls were predicting, even though the outcome of the race for the Electoral College with Democratic nominee Joe Biden remained unclear. Trump's best result of the night came early when he won Florida relatively comfortably. bagging its 29 Electoral College votes. There are still votes being counted in the Sunshine State, but it seems almost certain that Trump has improved upon his 1.2 point margin of victory here from 4 years ago. Trump still retains real hopes of winning the election, though his chances now lean heavily on pulling a surprise by holding on to either Michigan or Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, Trump had a wider lead, though a huge advantage in mail-in ballots could save the state for Biden. Trump held on easily in states that Democrats believe could be competitive, including Ohio and Iowa. He also seems to have a slight edge in North Carolina, which was higher on Biden's target list. A bad night for pollsters again. Going into Election Day, the verdict was clear from the polls. Biden was on course for a comfortable victory. It didn't turn out that way again. Biden has lost Florida and appears likely to lose North Carolina, leading both states in polling averages going into Election Day. As in 2016, Trump appears to have outperformed the polls in the Rust Belt and Upper Midwest. It will be some time before the national result is known, but Biden's polling lead, which averaged around 8 points, suggested an ease of victory that simply has not occurred. After 2016, there was much talk of how pollsters had improved their methods. Now they will face a whole raft of new questions, including whether or not they are simply missing some part of Trump's appeal. And this talks about Trump's speech, which was truly just infuriating to me. The remarks played right into the characterization of Trump as a would-be authoritarian and upped the chances of the kind of unrest many Americans had feared in the election's aftermath. In this process, they also overshadowed a night on which the president's electoral performance had surpassed expectations. And then Trump called the whole election a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. He said, we're going to be going to the U.S. Supreme Court to get all the voting to stop. But like I said again, I don't get how you can cheer this on. I really don't know how anyone could sit here, because, again, you're basing these allegations of fraud on nothing, and even with Biden eking it out right now, I mean, he is basically it looks like he's probably going to win. So the mass scale voter fraud here, to this extent, with this many votes, that obviously that swung the election, right? It's this was so predictable. Each state, they have all these different standards about when the ballots can be received. It's a little bit past Election Day, a few days. In Nevada, I think it's November 10th. It's interesting to me because conservatives, they love small government, and they don't want the government to tell you what to do, and states should be allowed to do what they want. Well, should we have federal election standards then? Should we have a standard that everyone abides by, a deadline that everyone abides by, all these same rules that every state has to abide by? Because that's not a conservative idea, just so you are aware of that. Just thought that would be useful. Media consensus on Trump is at odds with public perception. Over the course of his tenure, mainstream news outlets from CNN to the New York Times have become increasingly willing to brand Trump as a misogynist and a racist. They assert that his record is plain, but a significant share of the public, beyond the stereotype of the MAGA base, seems to disagree. According to exit polls this year, Trump won white women's support by a slightly greater margin, 11 points rather than 9 points, than he did in 2016. His deficit among all women remained unchanged at 13 points. This year, Trump drew the support of 18% of black men, up from 13% 4 years ago, and boosted his overall black support from 8 points to 12 points. Trump's support among Latinos at 32% was higher by 4 points than it stood 4 years ago. Those differences can't be ascribed to the exit polls being skewed by the preponderance of early voting this year. The organization conducting the exit polls corrected for that phenomenon by conducting interviews with early in-person voters and making phone calls to those who had voted by mail. Put simply, there are plenty of people beyond white men who just don't accept the reactionary version of Trump that is often portrayed by the media. And that seems to be the case. I mean, like, there was, like I said, in the minority communities, a lot of votes for Trump. And I think that, is it possible, like, those people that voted for Trump, could they have been swayed to vote for Biden? Like I talked about with the Latino voters, probably in certain cases, no, because they have that certain kind of view of socialism and Biden. And it's like, first of all, if you want to critique why the whole socialism thing is, like, hyperbolic, that's its own thing, right? But it's like, if they have that view, and, like, they're looking at Biden, like, Biden is just not a socialist. He's not for socialized medicine. He's a neoliberal centrist, like I've been saying. So, they just believe that about Biden, and there's nothing you can do to convince those people that he's not a socialist. But in other cases, other Latino voters maybe just were not as enthusiastic about Biden because they felt like he was just not going to do enough change. It's looking like now he can't really do any change because the Senate is pretty much Republican still, so he's going to be locked up for 4 years. Locked up in the White House. Biden, he's just not even going to do anything for 4 years. Just going to stick around. When it comes to black voters, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Joe Biden had a lot of different problems with the African American community too because of the crime bill. A lot of statements he made that were, I guess, gaffes, but it's just the messaging on the Democratic side was a failure. It's like that's not surprising to me. I know that they suck at messaging, but we're just seeing the results of that. I just want people to realize this has nothing to do with being privileged necessarily, by the way. The idea that, like, oh, you didn't come out to vote against Trump, so you must be, it must be such a privilege for you not to be able to vote. Well, the numbers show actually a lot of non-voters are not of privilege. They're poor. A lot of them are of color. And that reality is just not true. I mean, like, they've a lot of times lost hope in the system. And Biden was not doing enough to inspire a greater voter turnout, and he eked it out. I mean, like, this is what we're seeing unfold right now. And this kind of dovetails nicely into it. No ringing endorsement for Biden. If Joe Biden ends up being elected president, it will be the crowning achievement of a 50-year political career, but it will hardly have come in empathetic style. Running against a historically unpopular president amid a catastrophic pandemic, Biden, if he wins, seems at best to have eked out a narrow victory. It's an outcome that is likely to give Biden pause for thought, as it's far from a ringing endorsement of the 77-year-old former vice president. It also demonstrates the extent to which the nation is cleaved in half. Biden, if elected, has challenges in winning more Americans over to his side in such a polarized time. So, real quick though, this idea that, like, it's going to give Biden a moment of pause and, like, wow, he's going to have a lot of time to reflect about the mistakes he made in his campaign. Absolutely wrong. They're going to learn all of the wrong lessons. They're already saying on NBC that Biden didn't condemn socialism enough. That's why he didn't do well with these Latino voters in Florida. I mean, like, that's exactly the wrong conclusion in that case. Like, yeah, like I said twice now, that wouldn't have done anything. So they're always, the thing with the Democrats is, no matter how bad things are, no matter how much power they have, I mean, like, it seems as though the Senate is probably going to go Republican. The House, it was underwhelming there too. It looks like, I think, a Dem majority in the House, but it was underwhelming. And Biden, it looks like, will probably win the presidency, but he's not going to be able to do much without a strong Congress at his side. The Republicans are going to obstruct everything. So the point being, when they're in crisis mode, and it's like, oh wow, this is really an emergency for the country. Like we got to get things done right now. We got to improve the material needs for people. I mean, like they never frame it in that way, of course, but they're like, yeah, like, we got to go out and help the American people. But what they do in order to achieve that is compromise. They just compromise more and more because it's such a dire emergency, and the Republicans, they're not going to give in to anything. They're not. The Democrats need to approach this. Start with pushing stimulus like crazy and saying we got to get this passed. We got to get this out to American people's hands. Like get money into people's hands. And I know Biden would never do this, but like switch to Medicare for all and say we're going to get healthcare for people in the middle of a pandemic. We're going to provide for people. And of course, the Republicans will never agree to that. The strategy behind this is you're probably not going to get anything passed, even just the most watered down half measures possible. They're not going to give Biden a victory in any way. So what you have to do is win on the messaging as much as possible and show people like, yeah, the Democrats, they have an agenda that will be fighting for you. That isn't the case so much. I mean, like, it's a lesser evil. You know, it's slightly better than being screwed by the completely corporate-run Republicans. It's like the Democrats just kind of want to, you know, keep the corporate people on a little bit of a shorter leash and try and, like, protect them from American people. Like, so basically, like, yeah, like, the Democrats, they just want things to be slightly less worse for you than the Republicans. But we need an actual vision for the country that people can believe in, that will be tangible, that people can understand. And that did not happen with Joe Biden at all. It was just not there. It was such a amorphous thing, like I've described many times. So, yeah, like, they're going to learn all the wrong lessons. Like I said, they're going to keep compromising more. And people should be in the streets telling them, no, we have to go farther left. We need to actually fight for the people, not just trying to please Republicans. Like, we've been going over this for years. The Republicans are never going to work with the Democrats, no matter how much we compromise. You know, Pete Buttigieg was totally right. It was the one thing he was right on. It's like, it doesn't matter who the Democratic nominee is. The Republicans were always going to call them a far-left socialist. So, there you go. But let's talk about a little bit of positive news. There were some decent wins in Congress. There were some not so good things that came out of Congress, like a QAnon candidate is going to be in Congress now. So just the fringe people and conspiracy theorist people, they're being emboldened like crazy. Luckily, Laura Loomer lost in Florida, but we have Jamal Bowman in New York, and he's a member of the House. I forget what district. I think it's District 16, but I don't know where that is with New York. You know, it's a lot like AOC in the sense, like, you know, he's like in a safely like blue district, so it's like he's probably not going to get like a serious Republican challenger. I think it's a good thing. He's a Justice Democrat, so even though it may not seem that consequential in terms of like the gaining power aspect, having more people like Jamal Bowman, like AOC, and the rest of the squad, if you will, like having those voices push more progressive ideas, I think will be better for moving the party to the left, to the extent that it will move to the left at all, which I find very doubtful. But we need more of those voices to just transform the Democratic Party, take it over. And so there were some decent wins. Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush in Missouri, and there were some others for sure, but there were some disappointing losses. Lindsey Graham won his primary challenge was Jamie Harrison on the Democratic side, and Lindsey Graham won his seat back. Mitch McConnell got his seat back, I believe, and Doug Jones, the blue dog extraordinaire in Alabama, he ran against Roy Moore in 2018, the pedophile dude, and Doug Jones like eked it out in that one, and like everyone was like, wow, like such a huge deal. This Doug Jones guy instead of Roy Moore, the pedophile. And now Doug Jones, like once he got in, he was like he had a terrible track record with his voting record, and he lost his race after like one term. So amazing. Um, and I've heard, or rather read this article that there's talk about Nancy Pelosi being ousted from her role as Speaker of the House, and we'll see what happens with that. I think because the House victories were underwhelming. Like I said, there were some Republican candidates that were able to get in, and some of them, were pretty bad. Like I said, like the QAnon person. So they're just questioning Pelosi's leadership, as well they should. And it's like I read through the article and I'm thinking like, it's like I hope whatever name they're floating would be a good thing. And they said Hakeem Jeffries was being floated to replace Pelosi, and I mean I don't know enough about his record personally. It's like from what I understand, it's mostly pretty centrist. But we'll see what's to come of all that. In terms of the presidential race, it's like I'll do one last little check here, refresh here. It still says the same. Joe Biden 264, Donald Trump 214. We're waiting on results for PA, North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada. Like another key thing about this is like a lot of times it's the populated areas that are coming in last. This is the case with Georgia and even Arizona, which is at 84% right now. It's called for Biden. And when you look at Arizona, like Phoenix and Tucson here, like these are big cities, so it's likely that that's going to just put Biden more over the top. So a lot of people, they get all hysterical and they're like, why are they calling the vote with only 84%? What the hell? Or I don't know when they decided to call Arizona, like at what percentage that was. Right now it's at 84%. But it's like, when you look at the fact that, like heavily populated areas, they're going to tend to lean Democrat. The mail-in ballots are coming in, and they tend to lean Democrat. I think in Arizona's case, they counted the mail-in ballots as they were coming in. But again, like it doesn't take a genius to understand that. It's like the more heavily populated places are coming in last in a lot of cases. They lean Democrat. So if Biden's already in the lead in Arizona, you just got to face the fact that it might be it for Trump. I don't know. I'm not saying for sure, that they could change the result. So some new. It's like they always say if the Democrats do that, it's like, oh, if these ballots just show up in the middle of the night, oh, that must be fraudulent. But if it goes in the Republican direction, if Biden is leading in Arizona, but then all of a sudden they find these ballots that are really pro-Trump, and then actually he won Arizona, oh, of course that has to be legit. We have to really count that. So there's no consistency in what's going on here. Everyone on the Trump side, like they want a specific result. They wanted to achieve this particular result, and it's not happening with them. They're seeing that there's not a huge path to victory for them. It's like at least one that doesn't involve the Supreme Court. So Pennsylvania, like I said, like it takes a little bit more time. It's going to be till Friday, I think. Um, it's looking likely Biden will win. Um, there is still a path to victory for Trump in the courts, and I hope the Democrats can do whatever they can to prevent it from going to the Supreme Court and just win the initial battle at the state level, because it could spell disaster if it goes to the Supreme Court. If they just hand Trump a victory, I think that will lead to some pretty serious unrest. Like, considering he didn't win the popular vote, he's not in the lead electorally now, so just having a repeat of 2000 with Bush v. Gore, where you're just manipulating the results, I think that is a recipe for disaster, and I would hope it doesn't come to that.